Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today, and congratulations to Professor Dr. Salim Razi on the FAITH project, as well as on this international conference. It's my pleasure to join you today to talk about academic integrity policies. Some of you may be thinking that we'll get rid of the boring topic first, but really, many of us here today love to talk about policy. And if you don't love to talk about policy, maybe by the end of today's session, you'll be more interested in it. So in terms, do we have power? There we go. Yeah, power. Okay. In terms of the presentation today, we'll talk about the foundations of academic integrity policy, how we stand on the shoulders of giants, those who have come before us and continue to help mentor us in the work of academic integrity policies. We'll talk about academic integrity policies today, their importance, and how they lay the groundwork for the future. Will be the last part of the presentation, thinking about the development of policies in the age of generative AI and other advanced technologies that will continue to challenge us in terms of teaching, learning, and student assessment. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that you can take pictures of me on the slide if you want. You have my permission to share them on social media. At the end of the session today, I will share a QR code so you can have the entire slide. I start by understanding the past. In his remarks today, Dr. Salim Razi talked about his journey for academics. Many of us have had a similar journey dating back a number of years, or some decades. I think it's important to start here, not because I wanted to start with a history lesson, but rather to show that academic integrity policy concerns are nothing new. They've been around for decades and have been people who do this important work, who have provided a foundation. So if you're in a position at your school or your institution where you're developing the first policies or revamping the policies that you have, first of all, as Dr. Razi mentioned, you are not alone, and there's been a lot of work already done to help you build or improve what you're working on. And the first project that I wanted to talk about was one conducted by Professor Tech, and the other by Dr. Elaine. There are there's a lot of work done around policy, but I wanted to highlight two of the exemplars of excellence that we have in our community. In case you're not familiar, or in case you want a bit of refresher to help you understand the great work that's being done. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulders of these two women who led the way in our field. And Elaine continues to lead the way as the co-leader of the Eaton policy. The first project that I'll look at was one conducted by our beloved Professor Prof, who conducted this framework after doing extensive policy analysis work in Australia. This framework and the 4 elements of exemplary academic integrity policy lay the foundation for future research and policy development Europe, Canada, New Zealand, Latin America, and I believe Turkey as well. These 4 elements are things that we can think about including all of our policies. So I'll review them briefly. The first one we have is access. How easy is it for students to access academic integrity policies that we have? And I can take a little pause here and say, Professor Brecht's one of the things she talked about in terms of institutional maturity was how universities in particular, I started with a plagiarism policy. And later, they matured as organizations not to develop academic misconduct policies or academic integrity policies. But regardless, the policies that you have should be accessible to students. The policies that you have should be accessible to those who are affected most by it. So thinking about your own websites, and maybe even ask your students, how easy is it for your students to find policies? The next one will be around approach. Is the approach educational or punitive? To summarize some of the work that's been done internationally, many of our policies are still punitive and focus on administrative law approaches or legalistic approaches and fine and punishment approaches to student misconduct. And instead, many of us are advocating now for more educational approaches. talk a little bit more into the other projects that we're looking at. Then we have responsibility, outlining the responsibility of various parties in the university. Of course, responsibility is one of the values of academic integrity, but also administrators have responsibilities and teachers have responsibilities. And what does the policy outline about what are their responsibilities for reporting, investigating, keeping records, and so on? Then we have detail. Tracy Birthday and colleagues argue that a policy should have just enough detail. It shouldn't be so vague that it can be interpreted differently by every person who reads it. And it shouldn't be so detailed that it's too restrictive and has no flexibility. And finding what they call the sweet spot for the level of detail is important so that we can have a common understanding of what we need. Finally, support, not filing, and ultimately support in terms of what other things are available to help students. Charity, that it's not enough for a policy to just exist. The policy must have teeth, meaning that we must be able to enact it. In order to enact the policies, we also have to have the procedures. People have to know what do they do in that moment they think, I think I'm just not procedures. Or I've just seen this huge cheat on the exam. What do I do now? That may not be in the policy, but it might be in the procedure. In addition, supports for students. Legalistic language and policy doesn't really help most students unless they're studying law. Students need plain language support. If some of you now are familiar with the Australian Quality Assurance Agency TEXA, they now have support in a variety of languages. As a country that has many international students, they need support to provide academic support in the languages that the students are speaking. And then finally, access. Who has access to these policies and how easy is it for people to find them? So these were the core elements of exemplary academic integrity policies after a project in which a team looked at policies all over universities in Australia. And I'll talk about how a group of us in Canada have taken this framework, which was published first in 2011, and have updated it based on some research that we did. These are the papers. I have a QR code there. Some of you, of course, will already know the paper. But in case you don't know Tracy's work, please look it up. It's easy to read, it's sensible, it's very well researched, and it can help you in understanding the policy. This is a publicly accessible document, so the QR codes that I'll share on the slides today are all for free resources you can access. This is the second paper, and the two of them both published together. Which was unusual because Tracy was the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the journal until she passed away in 2020. It's very unusual for an editor to publish a peer-reviewed work in their own journal. That was so important that it went through the peer review process and was published. So I think that this speaks to the way that this particular project laid the foundation for others. There's a little known resource. You might know Tracy's two people, but if you try to check out the website that came from their project, the Academic Integrity Policy Toolkit, please check it out. You might get an error message saying that the site is not safe. That's only because the website is so old. But it doesn't meet current standards for website security. I've clicked on it a lot of times. It's okay. You won't get a virus. But this integrity policy toolkit is fantastic for helping to develop policies. And again, free of charge, because this was in Australia. So I'll move on now to another points in academic integrity research. I think Dr. Elaine, I really see a wave. And then she did something I mean. I'm seeing a lot of perception, so. After Tracy did her project, Irene started a different project looking at academic integrity policies in Europe, and I'm sure she can tell you all about it. But what I was most impressed by was that she didn't just look at one country; she looked at 27 countries in her academic integrity policy analysis that she led. Again, the QR code is there, you can have a look at it. And I gave you this screenshot from her website because there you can find the links to a number of executive reports and other reports that are country specific or comparative for a number of really well with it. So these two individuals, Tracy Brechstein and Irene Lipton, have made the foundation upon which the rest of us can build. So the key message here is that we honor and value the work of those who came before us. And this is an important aspect of attribution for us. So no talk about policy would be complete without acknowledging these two projects. So thinking about the present and where we are now with academic integrity policy, we have come so far. You know, when I started doing this work, I talked to so many students and colleagues and students that I didn't even know my university had an academic integrity policy. Like now we have workshops where we show students the policy, and we also, as part of our orientation for students and new professors, show the professors, by the way, we have a policy on this. So if you find this in your classes, we have a way to help you to any misconduct or alleged misconduct. 10 years ago, this wasn't happening. Even 5 years ago, many schools, this wasn't happening. But now, more and more schools have policies. We talk about them. These are not dead documents. These are living documents. And for those of us who are academic integrity advocates, we keep pushing our institutions to review them on a regular basis. As Professor Rodney mentioned, part of a cyclical policy review, for example, at my university and some universities in Canada now, every 3 to 5 years is what we recommend. The policy should be reviewed and updated. That was pre-COVID. That recommendation was pre-COVID and pre-ChatGPT. It could be that the cyclical policy review should happen a little more often. But nevertheless, let's talk about where we are today. In one of the books that I was working on academic integrity, plagiarism in higher education, I looked at this model, which was originally from the 1960s from Prof and Brenner's work in biological sciences, looking at the systematic system around this. This has been used by us. I didn't create this. It was a framework for me that helped me to simplify academic integrity, thinking about the various problems that we face at different organizational levels. And the first being the micro level for the individual. When it comes to policy, sometimes we hear we have individuals who have policies in their classes. I would argue this is the weakest form of policy because it's not supported by a department, which would be the micro level, or the institution, the macro level, or the Ministry of Education or higher education, the mega level. It will be weak. And students might go from one class to another class and have different professors with different policies. You could have a professor who says, you must not use ChatGPT in my class. And the student goes to the next class and the professor says, you must use ChatGPT in my class. So students get confused and they don't know exactly what to expect from one class to the next class. It's important that policies exist at a minimum at a departmental level, preferably at an institutional level, and ideally supported at a governmental level. And if there's governmental guidance that can help all institutions, when I say institutions, I'm not only talking about universities. Much of the work we've done in academic integrity has focused, in my opinion, almost too much on universities. It has neglected polytechnics, vocational schools, community colleges, high schools, K-12 education. But when it comes to things like academic integrity, we know, especially to put up some of the work done through Dr. Zina Khan and also Dr. Oscar Çanakkale, that K-12 or elementary, primary, and secondary schools is where this work needs to begin. And guidance from educational ministries helps institutions so that institutions can also be giving the same message. Universities probably don't need policies that are that different from polytechnics, but also for high schools to start talking about this. I can tell you that in my country, in Canada, in almost no provinces, in no classrooms, we talk about plagiarism or academic integrity. Students come to our universities for their first year experience. Some of them have never heard the term academic integrity. So this is some of the policy work we're starting to do now, because the students come to our campuses and many of them can engage in plagiarism because they haven't been taught to do that. So this is why when we look at a systems level approach that includes not only the individuals, but also the meso level of the macro level of the institution, and the mega level, including the community and the government, that we can see a more integrated approach that helps to support ethical decision making. Because really, that's what we're talking about. When we talk about academic integrity, we're talking about ethical decision making. And this, our classrooms are merely a foundation or one place where we can provide this training. But it's not the only training. It's not about not plagiarizing because it's good to give attribution, but not plagiarizing because we want to set an example so that when people go into the professional workforce, they can make good decisions and avoid fraud and corruption as a way of life, and start making decisions that become habits that can then be demonstrated outside of the classroom. So this was one framing that helped me understand policy beyond idiosyncratic approaches, individual approaches. If a person is not supported by the department, they may come up with their own policy. But how much better for the students if every classroom they go to, they get the same message, and that all of their professors support them and support their learning first of all. In this book, I thought we began to think about reframing and definition of plagiarism. And this had come from some policy work that I've done on examining plagiarism definitions in Canadian universities on in our policies. And we found I looked at 20 different universities in our country, and found that most of them talked about text-based plagiarism. Some of them talked about other kinds of plagiarism in computer code, musical composition, fashion design, other disciplines. And when we talk about plagiarism, we can think about it in both text-based and non-text-based. This was beginning to signal to me that our ideas about plagiarism could evolve beyond what we had thought about as text-based replication without permission. So that's why this framework around plagiarism was important to me and laid a foundation for public policy work. And in the second handbook, Professor Rossi mentioned, we have work on policy. So I just wanted to just do a quick show of hands in the room. The handbook, as you can see, is quite massive, 2,000 pages, 3 volumes, 112 chapters, 145 contributors. How many of the contributors are here in the room today? Please raise your hands. Please look around. If you get a chance to talk to these people have contributed to the major reference work in the world on academic integrity. Thank you for your contribution. When I say the major reference work in our world, I use that article deliberately. It's not a major reference work. It is the major reference work. And there is quite a bit on policy. And also wanted to just highlight what the work of everybody again who has been quite influential in connecting academic integrity policy to quality assurance. So the quality assurance schemes that we have in different countries and being directly connected to academic integrity. And I can tell you that in Canada, we've been starting to push these conversations with our quality assurance body. In my country, we have a decentralized approach to academic integrity. There is no federal ministry of higher education. Every province and territory region has their own quality assurance body. I mean, can you please talk about academic integrity? What do you mean? How is this connected to quality? Let me tell you. How much time do I have? But also connecting it to professional bodies, accreditation bodies, nursing, engineering, other professional bodies that ensure the qualifications of the professional to practice in the field. This is part of the work we do with policy, because policy needs to live outside of the document. It's not just a piece of paper on the shelf that gathers dust. There we go. So I think I've already talked about this before. But one of my jobs as the editor-in-chief of the Handbook of Academic Integrity is to read all 112 chapters and then to come up with commonalities between both frameworks. And at first, there was no commonality. It just seemed like an assortment of chapters between what I thought was going to be 2 covers. It turned out to be 6 covers because the book was so big, 3 volumes. But by the time I read them all, this framework started to emerge as I sat with these chapters, and it's a comprehensive academic integrity. I'll walk you through it. I have to first of all give credit to my colleague, Karen Ford, in Canada, at the University of British Columbia, who calls this the colorful swirly donut of integrity. And I saw someone on Twitter recently say that they would take a fight with out of integrity. Yes, let's do that. So I'll walk you through the framework. The orange swirl, or call it swirl, because this is my colleague's name for it. The orange swirl around student academic conduct is what we have historically thought of as academic integrity. Student plagiarism, student cheating on exams, student cheating on assessments in the classroom. But we know that the lives of our students are infinitely more complex than any generation before them. We know that our students are working in laboratories, doing PhDs by publication. And for this reason, research ethics, research integrity, and publication ethics are no longer the domain only of professors or researchers, but also of graduate students, and even more with undergraduate students. So thinking about what was once only for professors is now also for students. That takes us through the instructional ethics, the ways that we ethically assess students in our classroom. So if the way that professors or teachers are assessing students is seen to be unfair or unjust, students may turn to cheating because they feel cheated. So ensuring that teaching and learning is part of academic activity, an essential component of our framework. And from there, we go to institutional ethics and ethical leadership. The idea here being we cannot expect our students to act in integrity if the institutions in which they're learning are corrupt. I'm not suggesting that institutions corrupt, or my institutions corrupt. We all would like to stay employed, but nevertheless, we know that this is part of higher education in many countries, even in my own country, right? And in the handbook, we tackle some of the topics that have not been openly talked about before, such as sex remarks, schemes. In some countries or practices where female students in particular are compelled by their male professors to perform sexual favors in exchange for grades. This does not happen in every university, and it is not every professor who does this, but this exists. And we have not talked about this in our community, but we must talk about it if we want to talk about it. Because in this case, it's up to the institutional administration to take action. How can we talk to students about not plagiarizing if some of their professors are compelling them to engage in these kinds of behaviors? We cannot talk about student integrity if we don't also talk about professorial and administrative integrity. Because academic integrity lays the foundation for everyday ethics, which is the next slide. Here we have. Academic integrity is a foundation for ethical decision making. It's not only about the students, but about us as citizens and human beings. Finally, taking us full circle to professional and collegial ethics. The students, when we graduate, we hope that they will be professional, collegial, ethical, but they watch us. They watch us as their role models. Whether we behave well or we behave poorly, we're setting an example. So this is our comprehensive academic integrity framework that is emerged from the handbook, and you can see all of these topics addressed across the 3 volumes that we have. We also have some values frameworks around this. So I'll highlight one here, a very common one, many of you know it, from the International Center for Academic Integrity, first published in 1999 with some updates. We know the values: courage, fairness, honesty, respect, responsibility, and trust. These are often framed as student responsibilities. For example, in my country, we will talk about our students framed as it is the student's responsibility to know our policies. Some of the students don't even know that we have policies. And if they know that we have them, they don't know where to find them. So how can we ask them to be responsible for knowing the policy if they don't even know where to find it? But we also have responsibilities as teachers and administrators to show the students that yes, we have policies, yes, we follow them, yes, we enact them, and that we can work together with students. So the responsibility here, as one example, is not only for the students. We're starting to hear a common theme, that it's not only the students in this one, it's all of us involved. There are a multi-stakeholder approach that includes professors, administrators, researchers, staff, and others. In 2022, Professor Rising invited me and others to come and teach at his own school that he hosted here. And I had the privilege of joining along with some colleagues. What I was going with the professor from the United States, and as part of our conversations during that summer school, we started comparing academic integrity in Canada, my country, with those of Teddy, the United States, and understanding and unpacking some of the differences. It becomes a surprise that sometimes people confuse our two. I think something that is something that Canadians might find offensive. In any case, Teddy and I started talking about what are the differences between academic integrity in Canada and the United States. And we began to speak specifically about some of the differences in the United States and different schools of thought in the United States. And Teddy had been very active in the International Center for Academic Integrity. And we knew that one of the founders, Dr. Donald King, was very active in this field. He started this center and was very influential in terms of developing the framework. He worked at a school called Rutgers University in the eastern state of New Jersey. And just across the state line from him was another scholar in New York at Syracuse University. Her name was Rebecca Howard. These two scholars worked at the same time in the 1990s and early 2000s, very close to each other, literally across the state line. They never worked together. They never collaborated. She never attended any of their conferences. He never attended any other conferences she went to. They came from different schools of thought. And we were able, through our conversations together, to unpack in the United States, there's sort of two schools of thought. For those of you who follow American politics, you might not find it hard to believe that there are polarized versions of things in the United States. One are with academic integrity too, one with being the moralistic or character education school of thought based around values of being a good person and being a moral person. And the school of thought around this was mostly from scholars from the International Center for Academic. There's a different school of thought from people who are mostly English language teachers in compositions, led mostly by Rebecca Howard and her colleagues, Sandra Jameson, Lisa Davies, and Robiard. Sandra Jameson is now also involved in her project. Some of us are involved in the POP project. And this school of thought says plagiarism, for example, has nothing to do with that. They contested that you can plagiarize and still be a good person. That may be objectionable for some people who think that plagiarism is a moral offense. Their position was that students need to be taught citing and referencing. This does not come naturally to us. And if students are plagiarizing, it's not that they're bad people, it's that they haven't been taught properly. Rebecca Howard has a title of one of her articles, I think it's from 1992, that says, the title is Don't Police, Just Teach. And I can't help but notice in the title of that project that the word policy and policing come together. Sometimes we focus on the policing and not on the pedagogy. In any case, these two preeminent scholars in their respective fields never worked together. And I asked Becky Howard at one point, did you know what was happening in the International Center for Academic Integrity? Did you know about Dr. Kate's work? And she said, yes. I just because in her opinion, we don't need to talk about whether students are good people or bad people. She started with the assumption that most students are good people, and she wanted to focus on teaching good people. So these polarizing schools of thought exist. You might ask yourself, which school of thought do you belong to? I think in general in Canada, we sort of have both. Plus some other perspectives as well. One of the other perspectives that we are incorporating in Canada is paying attention to the values of our Indigenous people. And a project that was done at the University of Calgary in 2020 by one of our Indigenous colleagues talks about Indigenous values. So rejecting, for example, things that as a colonized country, she's like, but we as Indigenous people were here long before the colonizers. And she talked about respect, reciprocity, and relationality. So respect is common to the framework that's found in the ICAI framework, but she also talks about relationality and reciprocity. The idea being reciprocity is you have taught me, and now I respect you. And this idea that we have a relationship in this. And that what you give me, I must also pass forward. And pay attention as well to those who have come before me. And in the person who developed this framework, she didn't develop it by herself. She developed what we call Eaton. So it was approved by, validated by Indigenous elders in the community. And the idea that one thing that was explained to me is in some Canadian Indigenous culture is not one culture, but many cultures, is the notion of 7 generations. So what I know today, I know because of those people from the 7 generations before. And the teaching I do today is not for my students of today, to the students of today and their children, their children, their children, and so on. And this can change how we think about policy, because what we do when we address one student, we are addressing them, their friends, their children, and so on. And thinking about the ways that we can think more holistically, academic integrity being culturally and effectively grounded. There is no one single definition of academic integrity, but there are commonalities between the definitions in them. One of the things that I like to talk about here is that although we have these very important frameworks, they are not the only frameworks. And so it is essential when we're doing this work to respect the local customs and understand that although there may be commonalities, local interpretations are both valid and necessary. The international, the European Network for Academic Integrity has our policy working group. It was started by Professor Dr. Razi and is now co-led by Dr. Elaine and I'm speaking as well. If you are looking to get involved with the European Network, we invite you to join our policy group. It will be fun. And we love anything else. I'll tell you a little bit now about a project we've done in Canada around academic integrity policy. This was an unfunded project, but we knew that there had been work done in other countries, but none of our own. This was a project that we started in 2018. It was a volunteer project. And I don't have a QR code there, but you have a link which is all of our publications. And we wanted to look at colleges and universities across our country. And we took a different approach to this, and we had no policy experts really. So I had learned from Irene, I had learned from Tracy, I had learned from Sal and others, and I worked with people in our country, and we had an approach that we called nothing violence without us. Meaning that when we did these policies, we looked at different regions. And I got some advice from Tracy before I started this project. She said, your country's too big to look at all of the policies like we did in Australia. Divide your country into provinces and look at each province separately to make it manageable. So we included people from each region in our project, and if you look at colleges, we also included people from the college sector. We didn't only want to be people from the university looking at these policies. So we had a number of objectives. We started with wanting to understand contract cheating in our academic integrity policy. So as Professor Razi mentioned, in so many policies, contract cheating was not even mentioned. We had too much emphasis on plagiarism and almost no mention of contract cheating. But by doing this work, we were able to say we cannot solve a problem that we do not talk about. We still haven't solved the problem, of course, contract cheating. But at least gave us a lever to have informed discussions with administrators and others. We looked at universities and colleges across different parts of our country and included different project teams. Each phase of the project, including myself, one other co-researcher, and individuals who were also building their understanding of academic integrity and their understanding of policy analysis by joining us. We use Tracy Bartek's approach. So reproducibility in science we know is important. We follow the exact same method that Tracy and her colleagues had used a decade before in their research. We want to follow their footsteps. So in the early days, Tracy mentored us with some suggestions and gave us some ideas for how to do it. We did, I think, 115 institutions. We had about half and half of universities and polytechnics. I think our project might be one of the only ones in the world that includes so many of the polytechnics. And we might have done a deep dive on a single country, but I'm not sure on that one. So if you know if there's another deep policy analysis on one country, let me know. I'd be interested to learn. But in terms of the polytechnics, one of the things that came out of this now is that I have a colleague who's just reading a book, finishing a book on academic integrity in vocational schools and polytechnics because these have been neglected institutions for academic research. So what did we learn from this one? Well, we learned that the foundation that Tracy and her colleagues had with their work was sound. Reproducibility of science means that you can replicate the experiment or the research project and get similar results. We did that. And at the same time, we found that the field was also changing. So I'll move now to a pathway to the future to talk about academic integrity policies that are evolving. We will talk a little bit about generative AI, but it's not the only important thing to think about when we're talking about policy revision. One of the things we learned that the policies need to be evidence informed. We need evidence informed practice and also practice informed research. In other words, the people who are developing the policies can be informed by the research. One of the most useless things is for people to develop policies that have no knowledge of policy research. So please, if you're in the business of developing policies, connect with people who have developed policies before you have research done. And in this way, you can help to inform you as to some of the best practices. What has worked? What can work better? What are also some of the possible deficiencies of my existing current policies and how to make them better, so that we're not simply repeating policies of the past, because policies of the past won't address transgressions in the future. We, with all respect for Tracy Brentag and her colleagues, I have updated her framework. We have maintained the original and updated it with one additional piece. So we have now, the Canadian team, having 6 core elements of academic integrity policies that include all of the originals: access and support, detail, responsibility, and approach. And we've added one more. We've added equity. So let me tell you a little bit about equity and how we contend that this has been a missing piece in academic integrity policy and why I think we should pay attention to it. Historically, academic integrity policies and conduct policies have taken a one-size-fits-all approach. I've even seen matrices, maybe you have seen them too. First offense, minor, moderate, major offense, this is the punishment. Second offense, minor, moderate, major offense. This is a useful framework in terms of a starting point, but not an ending point, because not all students are made the same. So a framework such as this is good if it's flexible and allows people to understand the situation of the student. So in this article, this editorial that I wrote in 2022, I talked about new priorities for academic integrity, and one of them being equity, but also diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and for those of us who live in colonized areas, decolonization, and not taking a one-size-fits-all approach, but understanding students as individuals who may have different learning backgrounds, different learning needs, and different learning capacities and capabilities, and addressing the value of each person as a human being. This is not easy with the policy, but if we are really to talk about human rights and equity and inclusion, these are things we must consider in our policies. And here I'd like to give a shout out to our second keynote speaker of today, Professor Dr. Mary Davis, who is one of the world champions, if not the world champion for academic integrity and inclusion. And no doubt her keynote will provide some very valuable insights into the topic. So I'll just give you a little bit of a teaser with what I talk about now, that will no doubt she will expand upon in greater detail. And also, I like to highlight that Professor Davis wrote chapter 66 in the handbook, second handbook of academic integrity. So you'll find her, she's a true champion of students and inclusion. Thinking about the idea of nothing about us without us. When it comes to academic integrity policy, I would say that there can be no integrity without equity. If you are developing or revising your policies for academic misconduct, I implore you, please include students in your deliberations. Include students in the development of your policy. Include the people who will be most affected but implementation of these policies and get students' voices included in the discussions. And so many of the topics that we have around academic integrity, that it's administrators who have a conversation about policies. The student experience is never considered. The student voice is not considered. And yet these are the human beings that will be touched most if there is a finding of misconduct. So this is a call to action that I have for you. If you are developing policies, in Canada, one example that we do is work swiftly with the student government representative to sit on our policy councils and the observers. That may or may not work in all contexts, but if you have students who are interested in academic integrity, invite them to the team. Because they need to. And thinking about the ways that we can develop policies, we can sort of think about 3 different topics in develop. The punitive approach based in administrative law. Basically, it's a crime and punishment approach. The punishment should be time. This is quite a traditional approach. If you've done something wrong, you will receive this punishment. This is what most of the policies around the world still have in them today. And these policies are often considered fair and just when the punishment fits the crime. If you think about the way that the world is changing and the new framework that we have around academic integrity, and not only students have responsibilities, but also educators have responsibilities. Teachers have responsibilities to teach citing and referencing, to teach paraphrasing, to teach the ethical use of generative AI, and then the misuse or the lack of citation is not only a student problem, but also a professorial problem. So we can come to an educational approach. And if there's been a transgression, do not necessarily assume at the beginning that the student is a bad person, but that they may lack academic literacy skills. In Ireland, they have a beautiful term for their law, academic impoverishment. We talk about monetary impoverishment, for example, financial impoverishment, not having the money you need to do the things to do. And academic impoverishment means not having the skills that you need to do the things you need to do. A student should not be punished for being academically poor, but rather the policies can support them with workshops, tutoring, and other support that they need to be academically successful. It's not only the student's responsibility to know the policy and to learn the skills, it's also the educator's responsibility and the administrator's responsibility. And finally, more and more, there is increasing interest in restorative aspects or approaches to academic misconduct. When I talk about this, I'm talking about a completely different approach to academic misconduct than we've had historically in most of our universities. For us in Canada, we can draw from indigenous cultures, again, thinking back to relationality and building trust. And the idea here is harm reparation. Who has been harmed, for example, when there's an allegation of plagiarism? Perhaps other people in the classroom, other students who say, I did my work honestly, you've not done your work honestly, therefore you can't us. The idea is to build, rebuild trust and relationship with those in the community. In a historically punitive approach, the ultimate punishment a student can receive for misconduct is that they are expelled from the university, suspended, or kicked out of the university. The idea is that the worse you are as a person, the more we want you out. In a restorative approach, the idea says we are all part of the community, and we will do whatever we can to keep you in. What will it take for you to rebuild the trust with us so we can trust you, and you can trust us, and we can trust you to make ethical decisions? We have heard from people who have undergone this process, and it is not easy, and it is not inexpensive, but the students at the end of it say that they felt valued, and they felt important, and that they also were able to say, I didn't know what I was doing, and we did support them in the help, and that we can give them what they need to make them continue to exist within our communities, because you know that a university is one community for our students, but it's not the only one. They live with families and other kinds of communities, and ultimately we want to be able to respect them as human beings. So we know that our understanding of academic and research integrity is evolving. things are changing, will continue to change in the age of generative AI. We have excellent foundations upon which to build. If you're struggling with the development of generative AI policies and not alone, that's an amazing example of how you can build. Often when we talk about having an AI policy, we mean artificial intelligence policy, but this cannot be decoupled from academic integrity policy. So often, a generative AI policy is not actually an IT or a computer policy. It has to do with teaching, learning, assessment, and ethics. I would also say here, it is essential to avoid what we call knee-jerk reactions to policy. We saw this in COVID-19. Oh, something's gone wrong, we need a policy. We have a new technology, we need a policy. If we change our policies every 6 months, we don't have consistency for students. What we do need is good governance. We need strategies and approaches and processes so that the governance process can ensure that the policies are sound and that they can have a longer lasting effect for students and ultimately be fair for all of the students. Amy Orban in the United States talked about the Zyklopedic cycle of technology panels. She wrote this article in 2020 before ChatGPT. It talks about how new technology every single time causes a kind of moral panic, not only in universities but in society. She talks about how she's traced these technologies through history. And there's worry and concern and the idea that a new technology will somehow make our children stupid. It can't be helped. And so we've seen this in various technologies that have come before. She talked about a technology that people were very afraid would result in moral turpitude, bad decisions, crime, and intellectual dysfunction. And that technology was the radio. And then after that came the television. That was my generation. That is the idea that children watch too much TV, it will make them stupid. That wasn't the case. And then came the internet with the same narrative and the same dialogue over and over again. Every new technology will make our children stupid, will make them morally corrupt. We need to stop the technology. I'm sorry, we can't. We can't stop the technology. We've seen this now with ChatGPT, right? I've heard some colleagues saying, oh, ChatGPT will turn all of our students into plagiarists and make them bad people. It won't. There's still good people. Most of our students are good people. I don't have a slide for it here, but imagine, if you will, there's a bell curve. This is from a book called Woman by Nicola Deborah Logie, a book called Cheating. She doesn't have a bell curve in her book, but she talks about it. She talks about a bell curve. You know this bell curve, right? You've all seen a bell curve. And at one end of the bell curve, we have students who are deviant. Small percentage of students, 5-10% of students. No matter what we do, they will continue to make transgression and do bad things. This mirrors what's happening in society. Sometimes we hear police officers say 80% of the crime is committed by 20% of the criminals. Okay. At the other end of the bell curve, we have 5 to 10% of the students who never cheated. We were there. We were that percentage, right? We were the students who never cheated. I wasn't. I was in the bell curve of normal. I'm normal. Let's ask my husband. 80 to 90% of the bell curve of normal says if you put a person in a bad situation at a bad time, they can make a bad decision, but it doesn't make them a deviant. So when we're working with our students, we can think about working with the students who are normal. And for those students who never ever cheat, we will be the same. When I say I'm normal, it's because I remember copying by hand when I was grade 3, Canada, I was about 8 years old, copying the Encyclopedia Britannica for geography assignments because I looked at what was in the encyclopedia and I thought, I can't say anything better, so I just copied this. The teacher didn't catch me, so I keep confessing the sins. But many of us here may have made some small transgressions, or those of us who end up setting up to maybe 5 to 10% that are cheated. But if that's you, know that you are not normal. If you have never ever cheated in your whole life, you are not normal. Most students, most humans will have done some transformation. We have a colleague at the University of Swansea in Wales, Philip Eaton, and he puts it like this. I think it's eloquent and it's beautifully simple. He says, people cheat, and students are people. So I'll give him credit where credit's due. So we don't think about only punishing those who make transgressions, but also creating worlds and systems where we can support the people who are normal. Amy Orban talks about things I've adapted here from her work, things we know from past technologies. I'll go from number 10 down to number 1. You might have thought about the new technologies as the world did not end when the new technology was introduced. If you're like me and you've been around for a long time, you will remember a time when the internet came into our classrooms and you would be like this. I had a colleague who asked, can we turn it off? Is it the internet? No, we can't turn it off. But that's where we were 30 years ago. There's when a new technology is introduced, the world did not end. Children did not become stupid as a result of the new technology. Young minds were not corrupted any more than they would have been otherwise. Corruption may not be a direct result of the technology. And we did not have moral turpitude as a norm or moral transgressions. There was no massive job collapse or economic collapse as a result of technology. Some jobs were lost, some jobs were created, some jobs changed. Learners still need great teachers, whether it was through the age of the radio, the television, the internet, or ChatGPT. If you're an educator, your students still need you. We still have jobs. The robots are not coming for our jobs today. With this generation, I'm sorry. But we know that human creativity continues to thrive and adapt. And yes, we have complex ethical questions around things like copyright and those who earn a living from ChatGPT, but it doesn't compromise our human ability to be creative. Over time, panic will subside. Panic subsides with radio, subside with television, and subside with the internet. And eventually these become part of everyday life. And then we wonder how we ever live without it. I did a talk not long ago in which somebody said, do you think people will become too dependent on this technology? That they'll become addicted to artificial intelligence? And I asked, what are these devices you all have in your hands? Are we addicted? It's a debate, but we might wonder how we ever live without ourselves. So the key message here is that every new technology may create some panic, but it's not the end of the world. And after this, there will be other new technologies that will come after ChatGPT and the current generation of artificial intelligence. We also want to think about the way that some technologies have helped persons with disabilities originally. So the predictive text that you have on your cell phone now that will finish your sentence was originally developed in the 1980s for persons with learning difficulties in learning. Many people don't know the origin of predictive text now, but thinking about the ways that technology can help individuals who learn differently and live differently and understand the world differently. A key message here that I will share with you is if you are struggling with students in your classes, you know this. Students are not our enemy. Students, as we saw with the opening remarks earlier today, students are our future. And when we develop our policies and our procedures around artificial intelligence, we must think about students as our future and preparing them for a future with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not going anywhere. So when young people are talking today and offering remarks for our opening conference, what will their future be like? These are the people that we can be thinking about with our policies and how do we help create the professionals of tomorrow with our pedagogy and policies of today. Getting close to the end, but one thing I thought was very essential to talk about when we're thinking about policies is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Even in my own university, when we have discussions about policies, almost never do we consider human rights. But if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the word dignity appears about half a dozen times. Dignity. How many of our policies do we think about respecting the dignity of the human beings who are affected by those policies? and equity of our students. And this clause from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can provide a useful point of departure for discussion for academic policies. It's about crime. We don't want to equate academic misconduct with crime, but nevertheless, it's can be instructive. It says, well, Article 10 talks about everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and any criminal charges against him. By the way, for the other defendants in the room, the word can is in the okay, so everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing. We don't have public hearings for academic misconduct, but that the findings should be determined in an impartial way, so that not every professor is applying their own rules in their own classrooms, so that students have a completely consistent experience. And then also, everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in public trial, which is all the reasons and circumstances. The relevant part here is presumed to be innocent. If the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that for a common criminal, we must start with the condition we will presume as innocent until we have evidence to the contrary, is something in many of our misconduct policies that we do not have. We often start with an assumption of guilt. How often, if you were an administrator, you have a teacher come to you and say, I saw this student cheating in the exam. I have the proof, right? Okay, that's 1%. Okay, maybe more. More of us, right? And we said, okay, you saw something. Let's investigate what you saw. An observation is not the same as a conclusion, and every case will warrant an investigation. Why? Because we want to maintain human rights. And if you want to have policies that are sound, you can also use things such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I would argue that all students are entitled to dignity throughout the process, because at the end, these are still human beings. Okay, my time is just about out. So I'll recap some of the key messages from this morning's talk to help guide you potentially through the rest of the conference that we have today. Always, always stand on the shoulders of giants. As you ragtag, we continue to be grateful. And I read that you have a living legend at the conference here. Please talk to her throughout the conference. My definition of academic integrity are culturally and contextually bounded every single one universal definition. But as Professor Dr. Bradley pointed out in his opening remarks, we can agree on a definition for specific purposes and projects and use that definition for our common purpose. There can be no integrity without equity. As we're developing the policies, remember nothing about us without us. In this case, us as our students. So please include students in your policy revisions. And our understanding of policies must adapt, but do so in ways that can help us prepare for the future and ensure good governance is still upheld. And finally, to all of us, remember in the remarks of our young student today, our students are not our enemy. They are our future. So I promised you at the end of the talk that I would give you a copy of the slides. You have them here, a QR code. And I would also offer a challenge here and ask yourselves, what would our mentor do? Missy Redtag, Elaine and others. We can follow their guidance as we are developing our policies. And finally, we can commit to leading the education system better than we found it. This is the work of educators, administrators, and policymakers. And then finally, thinking of our students as our future. That's my time. Thank you for inviting me.